The lost Appalachian bloodline, so wicked their existence was erased from history. Deep in the shadow-drenched hollows of eastern Kentucky, where fog clings to ancient mountains like forgotten memories, there existed a family so twisted by their own blood that the very earth seemed to reject them. This is the story of the Harlow clan, a lineage so deeply intertwined with itself that by the 1950s, their existence had become a shameful secret buried beneath decades of silence. The year was 1953. The Korean War had just ended, and America was entering an era of prosperity and progress. But in the remote valleys of Pike County, Kentucky, time moved differently. Here, among the steep ridges and narrow creek beds, the modern world had not yet arrived. The Harlow family lived on a settlement that had been theirs for 5 generations, isolated not just by geography, but by choice and by consequence. The family patriarch in 1953 was Ezekiel Harlow, a man of 62 years whose face bore the unmistakable marks of generational inbreeding. His eyes sat too close together, separated by a bridge of nose that seemed to collapse inward. His jaw protruded at an unnatural angle, making speech difficult and eating a laborious task. But Ezekiel was not the worst affected. He was merely the keeper of a terrible legacy. The Harlow settlement consisted of 4 ramshackle cabins built from weathered timber, arranged in a loose circle around a central clearing where a stone well provided the only source of water. 17 people lived here in 1953, all of them Harlows. All of them connected by blood so close that even the most uneducated observer could see the physical toll. Dr. Margaret Chun was not an uneducated observer. She was a researcher from the University of Kentucky, 34 years old, driven by both scientific curiosity and genuine compassion. In the spring of 1953, she had been conducting a rural health survey in Pike County when she first heard whispers about the Hollow people living up Cemetery Ridge. Local townsfolk in the small community of Elkhorn City spoke of the Harlows only in hushed tones, if they spoke of them at all. The family came down from the mountain perhaps twice a year to trade moonshine and wild ginseng for flour, salt, and kerosene. They kept to themselves, and the townspeople preferred it that way, but Dr. Chun was persistent. On a cold morning in April 1953, she convinced Sheriff Thomas Blackwood to guide her up the treacherous mountain path to the Harlow settlement. The sheriff, a weathered man of 50 with deep-set eyes that had seen too much, initially refused. "Ma'am, some things are better left alone," Sheriff Blackwood told her, his Kentucky drawl thick with warning. "Those people up there, they're not like us. Haven't been for a long time." "That's exactly why I need to see them," Dr. Chun replied, her voice steady despite the unease creeping into her chest. "If they're suffering from medical conditions, they deserve help." The sheriff sighed, knowing the determination in her eyes. "I'll take you, but don't say I didn't warn you." The climb took 3 hours. The April air was crisp, carrying the scent of blooming dogwood and damp earth. As they ascended, the forest seemed to close in around them. Birds fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. When they finally emerged into the clearing, Dr. Chun froze. The sight before her would haunt her for the rest of her life. A young woman, no more than 20, sat on the porch of the nearest cabin. Her limbs were twisted at impossible angles, her spine curved so severely that her torso seemed to fold in on itself. Her face, though young, bore features that seemed ancient and wrong, eyes too large, a mouth that couldn't fully close, inside revealing teeth that grew in chaotic directions. The woman made a sound, something between a moan and a word, and from the cabin emerged Ezekiel Harlow. He moved slowly, his gait uneven, and when he saw the strangers, his face contorted into what might have been meant as a smile. "Visitors," Ezekiel said, the word distorted by his malformed jaw. "We don't get visitors." Dr. Chun forced herself to maintain professional composure. "Mr. Harlow, my name is Dr. Margaret Chun. I'm from the University of Kentucky. I'm here to conduct a health survey." Ezekiel studied her for a long moment, his 2 close eyes blinking slowly. "Health survey," he repeated as if tasting the words. "You want to know about our health?" "Yes, sir. I'd like to help if I can." What happened next would change everything. Ezekiel called out, and from the 4 cabins emerged the rest of the Harlow clan. Dr. Chun's training had prepared her for many things, but not for this. There was Martha, Ezekiel's wife, and also his first cousin, her face bearing the same collapsed features as her husband. Their children ranged in age from 5 to 30, each one displaying varying degrees of physical deformity. The youngest, a boy named Samuel, could not walk. His legs were twisted beneath him, and he dragged himself across the dirt using arms that seemed too long for his small body. but it was Rachel who captured Dr. Chun's attention most fully. Rachel was 16 and she was Ezekiel's granddaughter, though the exact relationship was more complicated. Her mother had been Ezekiel's daughter by his sister, making Rachel the product of multiple generations of the closest possible blood relations. Rachel's condition was among the most severe. She possessed a degree of mental clarity that the others lacked, which made her suffering all the more apparent. She could speak, though with difficulty, and in her eyes Dr. Chun saw something that broke her heart: awareness. "Help us," Rachel whispered when Dr. Chun approached. "Please help us. Confirase inscrito nes canal, because what you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about hidden American history and the devastating price of isolation." Over the following weeks, Dr. Chun returned to the Harlow settlement repeatedly, each visit revealing new horrors. She documented everything: the physical deformities, the genealogical charts that showed 5 generations of intermarriage between siblings, parents and children, uncles and nieces. The pattern was unmistakable and devastating. The investigation into the Harlow family revealed a history that stretched back to 1847, when the first Harlows settled in the Hollow. Brothers Josiah and Caleb Harlow had come to Kentucky from Virginia, bringing with them their wives, who were also their sisters. This was not uncommon in the isolated mountain regions, where communities were small and scattered, and where suspicion of outsiders ran deep. But what began as circumstance hardened into practice. The Harlows believed that keeping their bloodline pure would preserve their family strength, their land, and their way of life. They rejected all contact with neighboring settlements, viewing outsiders as threats to their unity. Dr. Chun discovered through county records that the Harlows had purchased their land in 1847 for $23. The deed, yellowed and brittle, was stored in the Pike County Courthouse. What the records didn't show was the deliberate isolation that followed. By 1875, the second generation of Harlows was entirely the product of brother-sister marriages. By 1900, the family tree had become so tangled that traditional genealogical charts became meaningless. Fathers were also uncles, mothers were also aunts, and children were so multiply related to each other that calculating exact relationships became impossible. The physical effects were cumulative. Dr. Chun documented them all in her field notes written by lantern light in a boarding house in Elkhorn City. May 12, 1953. Subject: Rachel Harlow, age 16, displays severe maxillofacial deformities, including prognathism, dental malformations, and what appears to be a cleft palate that was never repaired. She walks with significant difficulty due to hip dysplasia. Despite these challenges, she demonstrates above-average intelligence and is acutely aware of her condition. She asked me today, "Why did God make us this way?" I had no answer for her. May 19, 1953. Subject: Samuel Harlow, age 5, cannot walk or stand. X-rays would likely reveal severe skeletal abnormalities. His speech is limited to simple sounds. Its mother, Esther herself, the product of uncle-niece relations, shows him tenderness despite her own significant limitations. The family's capacity for love amid such suffering is profound. June 3, 1953. I have identified at least 12 distinct genetic disorders within the Harlow clan, including what appears to be a form of dwarfism, multiple cases of severe intellectual disability, congenital heart defects audible even without a stethoscope, and blindness in 3 individuals. The youngest infant, born 2 weeks ago, lived only 6 days. Ezekiel buried her himself in the family cemetery behind the cabins. But the physical deformities were only part of the tragedy, Dr. Chun also documented the social and emotional devastation. The Harlows lived in profound isolation, cut off not just from the outside world but from any possibility of a different future. Rachel became Dr. Chun's primary informant, speaking when her father and grandfather were out hunting or working the small tobacco patch that provided their only cash crop. Through Rachel, Dr. Chun learned the full extent of the family's practices. "My mama was my daddy's sister," Rachel explained one afternoon, her words slow and carefully formed around her malformed palate. "And my daddy was also her daddy's brother's son. Granddaddy Ezekiel, he says it's how we keep the family strong, keep outsiders from taking what's ours. How do you feel about that?" Dr. Chun asked gently. Rachel was quiet for a long time, staring at her twisted hands. "I feel like we're cursed, like God's punishing us for something. But Granddaddy says God made us special, made us different for a purpose. The purpose," Dr. Chun learned, was preservation. The Harlows believed that by keeping their bloodline closed, they maintained some essential purity, some connection to their ancestors that transcended physical reality. They saw their suffering not as consequence but as test. This belief system was reinforced by their complete isolation. None of the children had ever attended school. None of them had seen a doctor except for Dr. Chun. They knew nothing of the outside world except what they could glimpse from the mountain or learn from the rare trader who ventured up the hollow. Their understanding of their own condition was filtered through religious fatalism. Ezekiel preached to his family every Sunday, reading from a family Bible that dated to 1823. His theology was simple. They were chosen to suffer, to be different, and through that suffering, they would be rewarded in heaven. Dr. Chun tried to explain genetics, to help them understand that their suffering had a biological cause, not a divine one. But her words fell on deaf ears. The Harlows had created a complete worldview that explained their existence, and challenging that worldview threatened their only source of meaning. By July 1953, Dr. Chun had completed her initial survey. She returned to the University of Kentucky with documentation that shocked her colleagues. Photographs showed the extent of the deformities. Medical examinations revealed the scope of the genetic damage. Genealogical charts illustrated 5 generations of the closest possible inbreeding. She presented her findings to the Kentucky State Board of Health. The response was immediate and troubling. The meeting took place in Frankfort, Kentucky's capital, on August 14, 1953. Dr. Chun stood before a panel of 5 officials from the State Board of Health, plus representatives from the Department of Welfare and the Attorney General's office. She presented her findings with scientific detachment, though her voice trembled as she described the youngest victims. Gentlemen, what we're seeing in Pike County represents perhaps the most extreme case of genetic deterioration due to sustained inbreeding in American medical history. This family requires immediate intervention, medical care, and social services. The response was not what she expected. Dr. Harold Morrison, the Board of Health's chief administrator, a man in his late 50s with steel-gray hair and cold eyes, leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Dr. Chun, your research is thorough, but have you considered the implications of making this public? Implications? Dr. Chun felt her confusion rising. Sir, these people are suffering. They need help. What they need, Morrison replied, his voice hardening, is to be left alone. And what Kentucky needs is to avoid a scandal that would paint our entire state as backward and degenerate. Dr. Chun looked around the table. Not one face showed sympathy. Instead, she saw calculation, political maneuvering, and something darker: shame. Attorney General's representative James Caldwell spoke next. Dr. Kentucky is trying to modernize. We're attracting industry, building highways, showing the nation that we're not just hillbillies and moonshiners. A story like this about a family, so he paused, searching for words, deteriorated, would set us back decades, but they're human beings, Dr. Chun protested. They deserve care. They deserve privacy, Morrison countered. And so does the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Here's what's going to happen. You will seal your research. It will not be published. It will not be discussed. The Harlow family will be left in peace, and this matter will be closed. And if I refuse? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Morrison's eyes narrowed. Then you will find that your research funding has been terminated. Your position at the university has been eliminated, and your medical license in Kentucky has been revoked. Do I make myself clear? Dr. Chun left the meeting in shock, but she was not defeated. If the state wouldn't help, she would find someone who would. She contacted the Federal Children's Bureau, a division of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. In September 1953, federal investigator Robert Hayes arrived in Pike County to conduct his own assessment. Hayes was a veteran investigator, 47 years old, from Ohio. He had seen poverty and neglect throughout Appalachia, but nothing prepared him for the Harlows. When Dr. Chun led him up Cemetery Ridge, Hayes maintained professional composure until they reached the settlement. Then, confronted with the reality of 5 generations of inbreeding, even his hardened demeanor cracked. "Dear God," he whispered, watching young Samuel drag himself across the dirt. "How has this been allowed to continue?" Together, Dr. Chun and Hayes documented everything. They took additional photographs, conducted more detailed medical examinations, and most importantly, they interviewed every family member who could communicate. At this strategic moment, I want you to do something. Think about Rachel, 16 years old, trapped in a body destroyed by generations of her family's choices, aware enough to understand her suffering but powerless to escape it. If her story touches your heart, if you feel the weight of her tragedy, leave a comment right now saying, "Rachel deserved better. Let her story be heard. Let her pain be acknowledged. Comment now. Rachel deserved better. It was during these interviews that the full horror emerged. The family wasn't just practicing inbreeding through ignorance or isolation. There was a structure to it, a system enforced by Ezekiel and the generation before him. Young women in the family had no choice in their partners. They were assigned to male relatives based on what Ezekiel called family planning. The goal was to maintain the bloodline while producing enough children to work the land and care for the severely disabled family members. Rachel revealed this to Dr. Chun in a moment of desperate honesty. Next year when I turn 17, Granddaddy says I'll marry my Uncle Thomas. He's 42. I don't want to, but I don't have a choice. He says it's my duty to the family. Thomas was Ezekiel's younger brother, a man whose mental faculties were severely limited but whose physical strength made him valuable for farm work. The thought of Rachel being forced into this union filled Dr. Chun with rage and determination. Hayes immediately contacted federal authorities. A case was built not just on medical grounds but on civil rights violations. The plan was to remove the children from the settlement, provide them with medical care, and prosecute Ezekiel and the other family elders for child endangerment. But before any action could be taken, everything fell apart. In November 1953, Hayes was abruptly recalled to Washington. His investigation was terminated without explanation. Dr. Chun received a visit from two men who identified themselves as working for the Kentucky State Police. "Mom, you need to stop your activities regarding the Harlow family," one of them said. "This comes from the highest levels. Leave those people alone." "Who sent you?" Dr. Chun demanded. "Who has the authority to suppress a federal investigation?" They didn't answer. They simply left. But their message was clear. Dr. Chun later learned through back channels that powerful political forces had intervened. Kentucky's governor, a man deeply concerned about the state's image, had personally contacted members of Congress. Pressure was applied. The investigation was killed. The reasons were complex, but ultimately came down to shame and political calculation. Kentucky was trying to shed its image as a backward state. The Harlow case represented everything the state wanted to hide: poverty, isolation, ignorance, and the kind of degeneration that fed into every negative stereotype about Appalachia. Better to bury the story than to expose it. Dr. Chun refused to give up. If she couldn't help through official channels, she would try directly. In December 1953, she returned to the Harlow settlement one last time. The mountain was covered in fresh snow, making the climb treacherous. When she arrived, she found the settlement in chaos. Young Samuel had died 3 days earlier. His twisted body had finally given out, his heart unable to sustain the demands placed on it by his deformed skeletal system. The family was in mourning, such as they understood it. Ezekiel sat on his porch, staring at nothing. Inside the cabin, Martha wailed, a sound like an injured animal. But it was Rachel that Dr. Chun sought out. She found the girl in the small cemetery behind the cabin, standing before a fresh mound of earth marked by a simple wooden cross. "Rachel," Dr. Chun said softly. "I'm so sorry." Rachel didn't turn. "He's better off dead." "We all would be." "Don't say that. There's still hope. I can help you. I can get you out of here." Now Rachel turned, and Dr. Chun saw something in the girl's eyes that hadn't been there before. Resignation. "Where would I go? Who would want me looking like this? At least here, I'm with family. At least here, I belong somewhere. Rachel, next year, when you turn 17, I know. Uncle Thomas, I've known my whole life. It's my duty." The words were flat, lifeless. Dr. Chun tried to explain that she had choices, that the outside world wasn't as frightening as she'd been taught, that medical science could help her. But Rachel simply shook her head. "You don't understand. You can't understand. This is all I know. This is all I'll ever know." Dr. Chun left the mountain that day knowing she had failed. She had failed Rachel, failed Samuel, failed all of them. In January 1954, she made one final attempt. She submitted her research to a medical journal, hoping that publication would force action. The journal rejected it, citing sensitivity concerns and insufficient public interest. Her research was sealed and filed away in the university archives, marked restricted access. But the story of the Harlows didn't end there. Over the following decades, the family continued their isolated existence. By 1970, the settlement had shrunk to 8 people. By 1985, only 3 remained. Dr. Chun tracked them from afar, gathering what information she could through occasional contacts in Pike County. Each generation became smaller, weaker, more damaged than the last. Rachel never escaped. She did marry her Uncle Thomas in 1954. She bore him 3 children, all of whom died before reaching age 10. She herself died in 1971 at the age of 34. Her body simply giving out, worn down by genetic damage and hard living. Ezekiel lived until 1966, maintaining his beliefs until the end. His last recorded words, spoken to a visiting minister, were, "We kept the blood pure. That's what matters." The final Harlow died in 1989. His name was Jacob, and he was the last of a bloodline that had destroyed itself through willful isolation and ignorance. He was found dead in the last remaining cabin, alone, his body twisted by the accumulated genetic damage of 6 generations. After Jacob's death, something remarkable happened. The Harlow story was deliberately erased. The Pike County Courthouse experienced a convenient fire in 1991 that destroyed many old records, including the Harlow land deed and birth certificates. The university archives where Dr. Chun's research was stored were reorganized and her files were lost. The settlement itself was reclaimed by the forest. The cabins collapsed. The cemetery was overgrown. Within a decade, no physical evidence remained that the Harlows had ever existed. This erasure wasn't accidental. It was systematic. Kentucky officials, still sensitive about the state's image, ensured that this embarrassing chapter was removed from the historical record. Dr. Chun died in 1997 at the age of 78. Before her death, she entrusted her personal copies of the Harlow research to a colleague with instructions that they be preserved. That research, hidden for decades, has only recently come to light. The scientific explanation for what happened to the Harlows is straightforward. Inbreeding causes the expression of recessive genetic disorders. Every human carries multiple harmful recessive genes. But these rarely cause problems because they're masked by healthy dominant genes from unrelated partners. When close relatives reproduce, the chance of matching recessive genes increases dramatically. First-generation inbreeding carries significant risks. Second-generation inbreeding is catastrophic. By the 5th and 6th generations, genetic damage becomes so severe that survival itself becomes difficult. The Harlows displayed classic inbreeding depression, reduced fertility, increased infant mortality, physical deformities, reduced intelligence, and shortened lifespan. Each generation was weaker than the last until the bloodline simply could not sustain itself. But the scientific explanation, while accurate, doesn't capture the full tragedy. The Harlows were victims of ideology, isolation, and ignorance. They believed they were preserving something valuable when in fact they were destroying themselves. They were also victims of a society that chose shame over compassion. Dr. Chun tried to help, but she was stopped by people who cared more about image than about human suffering. The Harlows could have been saved, but they weren't worth the embarrassment. The cemetery on Cemetery Ridge still exists, though few people know it's there. Somewhere beneath the kudzu and wild blackberry bushes lie the remains of 6 generations of Harlows, a family that bred itself into extinction. Their story is a warning about the dangers of isolation, both genetic and social. It's a reminder that purity, whether of bloodline or ideology, is often a path to destruction. And it's a testament to the human capacity for suffering and endurance. Rachel Harlow deserved better. Samuel deserved better. They all deserved better than the hand fate and family dealt them. Their existence was erased from history, but their story remains, preserved in the hidden research of a doctor who cared when no one else would. The lost Appalachian bloodline. So wicked their existence was erased from history. Now you know the truth. Now you understand what happens when bloodlines close, when isolation hardens into ideology, when shame silences compassion. If you've watched until this moment, if this story has moved you or shocked you or made you think differently about hidden American history, then I need you to do something. First, make sure you're subscribed to this channel because stories like this, stories that were meant to stay buried, need to be told. Second, leave a comment saying I watched until the end, so I can know who truly appreciates these deep investigations into forgotten tragedies. Third, hit that like button if you believe these stories matter. And finally, share this video with someone who needs to understand that real history is often darker and more complex than we're taught. The Harlows existed. They suffered. They were erased. But their story will not be forgotten again.